Well, I did finally find my way back to talk some more about the HiFive Unmatched riscv system that I've been experimenting with. Thank you all for the kind words and the positive feedback on my first video, and I'll say I didn't expect it to take so long to get a second one out. One small reason for the delay is that I did finally invest in what's supposedly a decent microphone, so I'm not using the tiny cheap microphone attached to my gaming headset. And even though this microphone will not make me sound like James Earl Jones, nor will it grant me the hype skills and the personality of a ringside announcer at a boxing title fight in Vegas, my hope is that it will reject some of the ambient noise in this untreated acoustic nightmare of a room in which I record. With several computers running, including the HiFive Unmatched system, hopefully the new equipment will result in cleaner and less distracting audio than in my first video. The primary reason for the delay, however, was essentially analysis paralysis, just trying to focus and determine topics and content. The path for the first video was easier to find since I had to assemble the HiFive Unmatched into a system first. But as I said at the end of the first installment, my chief interest is exploring the developer ecosystem and not necessarily optimizing the hardware and the OS in the short term. And since I'm talking about application programming instead of low-level systems programming, I'm not sure to what degree prospective audiences might overlap. I've already developed a small proof of concept that, as I'll explain at the end of this video, will become a third episode. So instead of trying to edit down hours of recordings on that and mix it with some discussion of quality of life improvements that I would like to have with hardware and operating system, I decided to make this one much shorter. As I do go through system status, the endless refrain will be the Sapphire forums. I cannot stress enough how helpful this resource is. So the first thing I want to note is that the CPU is still running at 1 GHz. If you head over to the forums, you'll see that the Ubuntu image for 2104 that was out at the time the board was released used a first stage bootloader that had locked the processor at 1 GHz. While I'm sure the Ubuntu images will be updated in the future since the board runs at 1.2 GHz stable, someone on the forums has posted some instructions for updating U-boot. I've not tried this myself, and so this video and the following video were recorded with the clock at 1 GHz. If you'll notice, the GitHub repository that is referenced in the forum post is a great resource for riscv in general, and even this board in particular. The next update is that the SD card is still required to boot even when running from the NVMe drive. From what I gather looking at the forums, it may need a firmware resolution. And if we look at Carlos Eduardo's great riscv GitHub resources, we see a nice clearly laid out explanation of the stages of the boot process. And of course, now that I've referenced Carlos' repository twice, I'll have links down below. And now we come to one of the main offenders in the noisy environment that I'm recording in, and that's the HiFive system itself. The tiny little CPU fan is quite a screamer, and some of the folks on the forums have posted a bill of materials so that we can at least get the specs for that fan. As you can see, it's a tiny little thing, and someone on the subreddit for riscv posted links to what might be a quieter ball bearing fan. I have purchased these fans since they're so cheap, but I've not attempted to replace the fan on the Unmatched with one of these yet. And finally, my AMD Radeon R7 260X GPU is still running with the older Radeon drivers rather than the AMDGPU drivers. My particular card is a Sea Islands class, but the cards in the Southern Islands class face the same issues. There's finally a lot of discussion about this on the Unmatched forums, and someone with a Southern Islands card has consulted the ArchWiki and some of the other information provided and has been successful in forcing Ubuntu on the Unmatched to use the newer AMD GPU drivers. I haven't been able to confirm the full series of steps into a nice list that even a kindergartner like me could follow, but I know it involves passing kernel parameters via U-boot. I can't wait to get a playbook confirmed for this and get these drivers updated to see what effect it has on performance. Now, as we finally get to the part about using the system and we watch GNOME act like molasses, keep in mind that, as we just said, the clock is running at 1 GHz instead of 1.2, and the drivers are not optimized for the GPU. Now, some part of the adventure that I'm trying to capture here is what's available in the Ubuntu repositories in July of 2021 that allows you to get some real work done on this system right away. I didn't capture the install of Dia like I did some of the other tools, but here I want to show working with it to sketch out the plan for the proof of concept that I've completed and will show in the next video. Here I load up a diagram that I'd previously put together and see how slow it is to manipulate. Even though Dia is not Spark's Enterprise Architect or Visio, it's perfectly serviceable and it's in the repositories today. Now here I'll install Krita to spice up the diagram a little bit, and keep in mind that I have a very fast broadband connection and wired Ethernet, so Wi-Fi is not an issue. But we should also consider the amount of packages. Since I followed the instructions for installing minimal GNOME packages to begin with on this system, probably needed to grab quite a bit. Just to be clear, unless I disclose with an overlay, all this is recorded at normal speed. Pretty slow and choppy on trying to resize these images, which I don't experience the same thing on my Intel box, so we can't fault Dia here. A little sluggish switching between tabs just to select pictures to copy. I began looking for packages that were available in this ecosystem already before I purchased the HiFive Unmatched, and I had even started prowling through the Debian ports repositories before I set up Ubuntu 2104 image in QEMU. And while I know the Ubuntu repositories are likely different than Debian, this was still a great resource to begin seeing what was available while I tinkered in a non-graphical QEMU environment running off of my regular Intel Ubuntu box. If you drill into the riscv-64 hosted architectures, you can see an alphabetical list of ports. For example, here was how I found that Python 3 was available even back in the QEMU days before the Unmatched release. They also provide a handy report across all architectures that shows the packages that have failure to build from source. So that could be a very handy tool if you're trying to find out why your favorite package is not available yet. We'll probably talk about the lack of the V8 engine, Node.js, and Electron in an upcoming video, but if you're wanting to develop in the summer of 2021, you're going to need to revisit some editors that you may not have looked at in a while if you've gotten addicted to things like Atom and Visual Studio Code, and even some of the old huge standbys like Eclipse are not here yet. I know people are probably screaming at the video now saying all you need is VI or Vim, but for people without that muscle memory, let's see what kinder, gentler options are available. Even though I installed minimal GNOME, I found myself drawn to Kate as a first choice to explore. I'd used GNOME Builder in the past, tinkering with Vala and GTK on 64-bit Intel, so I wanted to try an editor that I'd never really used before. It looked like it would support language server protocol and other niceties, so even with a lack of theming due to the fact that, again, I'd installed minimal GNOME to start with rather than KDE, it looked like it would have everything I needed to start experimenting with Go on RISC-V. Well, I could have written some Python in Kate as well. This was about exploring new things. So while searching for editors and IDEs, I found a Python-specific IDE that I'd never heard of called Spider. It took quite a while to install. It was very slow to start up, and as you'll see in future videos, it was quite sluggish, just simply editing text. Maybe after updating the system clock speed and getting the right AMD graphics drivers, it'll be a different story. If we look, we'll see that Spider is Qt based, so there were probably quite a lot of prerequisites that it had to download on this fairly clean system. So you'll see me using these editors in an unpolished state in the next video. I'll be writing a simple publisher in Python to post a JSON message to a RabbitMQ exchange. The exchange will post these messages by topic out to 2 different queues, and then we'll have a Go listener watching each of those queues to process the messages and save them in Postgres. And all this is available now in July of 2021. And even though I won't use all of these in the POC, here are some packages that I've already used on the Unmatched or compiled from source easily and have found no problems with so far. Again, I'm very thankful and amazed at how much porting and packaging has been done already. And a reminder that I've already completed this small proof of concept, so once I get everything refined and cut down into a reasonable format for another video, remember it was done without optimal CPU speed or with optimal graphics drivers. I think if I continue to do videos beyond a third, that I'll be exploring KDE and possibly XFCE. While this episode might have been a little unfocused, I hope there was something of use to you and that you enjoyed it, and maybe we'll see you again.